In Leviticus 23, I call it break points, where you will see at the beginning it speaks about, you'll read the phrase, speak unto the sons of Yasharel. And then he goes on to talk about 6 days you labour, the Sabbath is the Sabbath of rest. And then he goes on to talk about on the 14th that you keep the Passover, the next day, the 15th, is a high day, and the 21st is another high day. And then a break point comes in, and you'll see again in that whole chapter of Leviticus 23, you'll see a break point come in. And every time you read those words, speak unto the children of Yasharel, you can divide off. So in other words, he is categorizing the top 3 festivals, which is Passover, first day of unleavened bread when he's on the stake, and the last day of unleavened bread. And then you get the break point comes in, and then he says, speak unto the sons of Yasharel. And every time that break point, I'm looking at Mary's table now, and I see a table mat. So if I stood the table mat sort of vertical, I could put a divider between the Passover and the days of unleavened bread, whether it be the first day or the last day, and now I put the table mat in between as a divider. And then we get to the bit where it's talking about where we are today. So it's telling you straight that there's a divider there, and every time you see that phrase, speak unto the sons of Yasharel, there's the divider. So we know of an absolute certainty that the day today, the 26th day of the day 1 of the Omer count, is not to be counted within the week of unleavened bread. And if we were in any doubt whatsoever, we can further prove that by Acts 20 verses 6 and 7, which tells us straight. I mean, some people do believe, I've got friends who do believe that Paul is a false apostle. I'm not personally one of those people that believes he's a false apostle. And so therefore, when I read in Acts 20 verses 6 and 7 that it says, we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. So if anybody's kept the days of unleavened bread, you assuredly have also kept the Pesach. So then it says, we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. Well, the last day of unleavened bread is the 21st. It's a high Sabbath, so Paul the Apostle is not getting on the boat on a high Sabbath, which is the 21st. So the following day, being the date of the 22nd, it says that Paul boarded a ship bound for Troas. And it even tells you the little intricate detail that the ship takes 5 days to get to Troas. So if you put your count, 22nd is the day he got on the boat, 23rd, 24th, 25, 26. There are those 5 days in the book of Acts, 26 and 7. And there it's proven. And so therefore, that is another proof that the wave sheaf, which is on the 26th, is not a part at all of the week of unleavened bread. But I've learnt something else which I think is quite interesting. On the 18th, the date of the 18th, that is the date when Yahusha rose. But some people in some calendars, and I'm not having a pop shot at anybody, I'm just not interested in pop shotting anybody, but on the calendar that I put together, it shows that on the 18th, that is the date when he rested on the Shabbat. But not only did he rest all of the daytime of the Shabbat, but it also becomes that it's quite apparent that the 18th night, the dark part of the 18th of the Shabbat, is also, he is still resting in the tomb, and he does not rise from the tomb until it becomes the dawning and the morning, because Matthew 28 verse 1 tells you straight that Mary came to the tomb early in the morning, which is the tail end of the Shabbat. And it tells you, Matthew 28 verse 1, at the end of the Shabbat. And she looks inside and she sees the angel, and the angel says, "Who are you looking for?" And she says, "I'm looking for my master." He says, "He's not here, he's risen." But he hadn't risen in the daytime of the Shabbat. He rose at the coming to the end of the Shabbat. So that made it that his first whole 24-hour period commenced on the date of the 16th, and the 16th night was his first night in the tomb. The 17th was his second day in the tomb, and his 17th was his second night in the tomb. The 18th, which is the Shabbat, is his third day in the tomb, and he's got his third night in the tomb, the night of the 18th. And it's absolutely easily proven that this is correct, because I think we spoke about that last night, that Joshua 5 verse 10 speaks of an order where it speaks about they kept the Passover on the 14th in Gilgal. On the following day, right, which would be the 15th, they ate of the produce of the land. Then it says, the next verse says, and on the morrow, after they had eaten of the produce of the land, which is, right, coming now to, they kept the Passover in Gilgal, that's 14. On the morrow after, they ate of the produce of the land, that's the 15th. And then it says, on the morrow after they had eaten of the produce of the land, which brings you to the date of the 16th. And it says, the manna ceased. And of course, when those two men, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, they exited that tomb, and they rolled the stone to the door. And when they rolled the stone to the door, it was shortly after, not very long afterwards, the sun would have risen, and the date would have become the 16th day. So because of the terminology in Genesis where it says day equals light, so probably about 40 minutes after they'd exited the tomb, the sun would have risen, and that fulfills his commencement of his first day, 16th and 16th night. 17th is his second day, 17th night. 18th, which is the Shabbat, and 18th night. And the fact that why they took so long in the tomb the night of the 15th, after he'd hung all the daylight on the stake, he'd hung on the stake there, and it wasn't until evening when Joseph of Arimathea went to ask Pilate around 6 o'clock that night of the 15th for permission to take the body. When he was given the permission to take the body, they carried the body to the tomb, and in that tomb, that is where they did all of the work. Using lamps in the tomb, they prepared the entire body for embalmment, which meant that they had to completely, utterly wash the heavily congealed blood from his body. It would have taken many hours to get all that blood washed. His back was in ribbons. Can you imagine the work of trying to get that blood off his back? His forehead, his head would have been completely covered in blood. And so by the time that they actually had removed all this blood, and then after the removal of the blood, they then have to commence the process of the embalming, which was using the linen wrappings and the spices. And by the time all this is completed and they wrap his head in the talit, this is the interesting bit, that when I went into the tomb, the garden tomb in Jerusalem, I turned and I looked and I thought, wow, fancy that. It's just like the book at home says that there would be 2 chambers in the tomb. And sure enough, I was surprised there were. And there was the one stone tomb, and on the other side, the first one on the left is not the tomb. It is the preparation chamber where they washed him. But the one on the opposite wall is the actual tomb. And when I looked and I saw the last 7 inches of that tomb smashed out at the end, I thought, what in the world went on here? You know, why is all that? The rest of them are like perfect precision, but the last 7 inches has been belted out. Hammer and chisel job. And the reason for that is what it says in Isaiah 28 verse 20. It says, but the bed was too short for a man to lie down in. And that's precisely what they did. They had to quickly, before the dawn was coming in and breaking, they had to smack out